Good morning again. Good morning, those of you who are here from home. It is a great gift that we have in these platforms, right? We can be together across miles and experiences. This has been a long season of shifting what we believe is possible, yes? Especially in community. And I'm aware of both how great it is that virtual worship is available and how hard it can be not feeling like we can all be physically present among people and places we love. So it continues to be my honor to be among you here, in person and in our virtual and altogether holy spaces. I'm grateful for our time today. In my discernment about our time together today, I was reminded of someone named Marva Dolores Collins. Is anyone in here by any chance familiar with Miss Collins? Does anyone know who she was? Okay. She was an educator, born in the South, who made her way to Chicago, where she had been a substitute teacher for 14 years. Noticing the low levels of learning that some students were experiencing in particular areas, Collins took $5,000, which was a large sum of money in 1975, right, from her own teacher's retirement account and started a private school in the top floors of a brownstone in the West Garfield Park neighborhood where she lived. The school she started was called Westside Preparatory School. Now, Westside Prep was educationally and commercially successful for many, many years. Collins and her daughter ran the school for more than 30 years until it closed in 2008. But the school's success is not actually the point of this story. Collins, a black woman teacher in Chicago in the mid-1970s, built a low-cost private school specifically for the purpose of teaching low-income black children from whom Collins felt the Chicago public school system had failed. Where others had concluded that the students at Westside Prep were unteachable, Collins was so convinced that these students could thrive that she determined to ensure their flourishing. Now, these are not trick questions I'm about to ask. How many people do you think told Ms. Collins that she shouldn't or couldn't attempt to open a school?
All of them.
Listen. How many banks must have turned her away from any prospect that she would get a loan to help her get started?
All of them.
Likely all of them. How many colleagues do you think, even family and friends, discouraged her? Probably a whole bunch of them at least. But she did it anyway. She, in her own way, climbed up onto the roof where the crowd was too big and the noise too distracting and made her way down, a reference that I'll mention again in a little while. And she did it that way not because it was easiest for her. I'm sure it was an uphill battle in 1975, but because she had enough of a relationship with those kids and their families that she knew it would most benefit them to disrupt the usual course of events and do something different. And her motivation to bring this beautiful idea to life was the very lie that fueled others' discouragement, right? The too often believed and equally misguided notion that nothing can be done, so why bother trying? This is a moment in our nation's story. We're in the here and now right now. We're not in 1975. Although some of what I'm about to say is probably not that much different. Right? We're in a moment in our nation's story where knowledge about the death and mistreatment of Black bodies and indigenous bodies and non-Black people, POC bodies, at the hands of the state are at an all-time high. Knowledge. Notice I didn't say death and mistreatment is at an all-time high. That's been going on for a very long time, right? We know about that. But knowledge about it is at an all-time high. We're at a moment in our nation's story when the impact of a global pandemic on the health and well-being of all of us is still weighing on us. We are still in the middle of this. We're at a time in our nation's story when courts all across the land are literally changing our ability to live fully in our bodies. We have a responsibility as humans, as human beings in this moment. We're not even talking about UUs, but as humans in this moment, and as people of faith and good conscience, to understand how to move beyond the scarcity thinking of nothing can be done. Because we actually need one another now more than that mindset affords us. Does that make sense? We have to disrupt that continually. We have to disrupt survival of the fittest. And we should wait. Oh, that's a good one. That's a special one in church, isn't it? We should wait. We have to disrupt all of that and shift into thriving for us all. Not sometime in the future, but right now, because the need has been that great for lifetimes before we ever got here. And sometimes the only way to know that we can count on one another in the ways that matters most is to show up in the most unusual, most untested, most uncomfortable. Did you hear me say uncomfortable? Okay. In the most unwieldy ways. Sometimes those ways, the untested, the uncomfortable, the unwieldy, sometimes those are the only ways forward. In an ongoing exploration on my part of what this shift really requires, the word that has consistently shown up in my spirit is disruption. Say that word with me, will you? Disruption. Let's say it again, especially for those at home. Disruption. Ooh, that's good. Merriam-Webster defines disruption as to break apart or rupture, or to throw into disorder. Ooh, I can feel the discomfort already. Or to interrupt the normal course of things. Now, we all know what disruption can do. We do. The pandemic has shifted how we interact with one another, how we go to work, where we eat, and what feels most important. And so it would be understandable if some of us in this moment were recoiling right now at the thought of a theology of disruption. Haven't we had enough of that already? Oh, I like this. Let's see if you believe it. And why on earth would we want more of it, to be honest? But, you know, there's a staff writer from Forbes magazine. Her name's Caroline Howard. I never ever thought in my life I'd be quoting from Forbes magazine, which is kind of funny. And if you knew more about my life, you'd understand why I think that's really funny, which I may say later. I'm not going to do that now. But she actually wrote about disruption in a business context that I actually think has some bearing on us now. She said, and especially bearing on us as Unitarian Universalists, right? Let me just say that out loud. What she says is this: disruption takes a left turn by literally uprooting and changing how we think, behave, do business, learn, and go about our day-to-day. It produces something new and more efficient and worthwhile. It is at once destructive and creative. That's what Caroline Howard had to say. What would it mean for us to really show up for ourselves and one another and be in opposition to systems and people and relationships that do harm? What would it mean for us to say no more? To be truly disruptive? Just like Ms. Collins was back in 1975. It would mean rupturing, sometimes a little bit at a time, right? And sometimes in great waves, systems and mindsets that are harmful and that operate to ensure that we don't have what we all need to simply be our whole best human selves. Maybe that rupture happens when things happen like congregants. There was this church in Durham, North Carolina called Citywell United Methodist Church in Durham. And a massive disruption happened when community members of that church surrounded an ICE van. Do we all know what ICE is? Right? Surrounded an ICE van for 3 hours in an attempt to keep their beloved Samuel from being deported after living in North Carolina for over 2 decades. I am certain that the folks who showed up to take Samuel were not expecting that crowd of people to show up and surround that van the way they did. Or maybe disruption happens when thousands of people come together all across the country over months and years to help shift the narrative that the only way to respond to and resolve issues in community is by calling the police. Or maybe it's when a ministry team decides that part of its onboarding of new teammates requires training about anti-racism and anti-oppression, and makes clear that folks who are struggling with the need for such work cannot serve in leadership. That's big. That's big. That's a little disruptive. Or maybe it's when we remind ourselves on a really hard day that our worth is not tied to how much we produce, and then choose not to work if that's a real option for us, but choose instead to rest and do things to build our bodies and our spirits back up. How many of us have moved right past an opportunity for rest? Moved right on past an opportunity to build our bodies and our spirits back up. Maybe that's just me. Am I the only one?
It's just you.
Wow, I have never pursed my lips at anybody here yet. That's really great. Thank you. There's a first time for everything. You all did not. The folks at on Zoom probably saw me, but not everybody saw me. Just look at her like, stop. Stop it. I love you. Or maybe it's in the ordinary course of things when we say the thing that you know will unravel everyone around you, but you say it anyway, because it will not only save your heart and soul, but it will serve as a beginning to undoing what has been hurting entire communities or movements for generations. We have a call as Unitarian Universalists to infuse the meaningfulness, and I would even say the hopefulness of disruption into who we are and what we do in this world as it is, if we in fact are committed to this world being different and better for all of us. If meaningful change locally and in this country is what we seek, breaking through to the other side of the lies we've been taught, what we've been told is the only way to do a thing, and what we've grown comfortable with is perhaps how we find it. Can I say that one again? If meaningful change locally and in the country is what we seek, breaking through to the other side of lies we've been taught, what we've been told is the only way to do a thing, and what we've grown comfortable with is perhaps how we find it. Now, I'm not going to lie and suggest that this is pretty or easy work. But we're not living it if we're not practicing it. Ashe? We're not living it. We're not living it if we're not practicing it. What good? What good does a recitation of those 8 principles bring if we have no idea how to, or have no actual interest in actually living them out in our day-to-day lives? Not just when we're in the building, not just when we're on Zoom in a meeting, but each and every moment of each and every day of our lives. The reference that I made earlier, I was thinking about the story in the 5th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. When people couldn't find a way into the house to place their ailing friend before Jesus for a healing, some of us may know this story. I believe people focus way too much sometimes on the healing that happened once the friend was already in the building. But I actually think in many ways that's not the best way to go with this story. I believe it's really, really more important to think about the intense disruption that it must have taken to have these friends climb up onto the roof of a building, tear the roof apart, and literally lower this man down on a stretcher into the middle of everyone to lay him before Jesus for that healing. Think about how much disruption that must have taken. Well, we can't get him in there the way that we're supposed to. We can't go through the front door. The door's not accessible. But we can talk about accessibility another time. We are going to talk about accessibility a lot. So you know what we're going to do? We're just going to tear the roof off and get him down here the way that we can. Remarkably disruptive. But it worked. It worked. And for all of us, in the process of peeling back layer upon layer upon layer of conformity and complacency, we're not going to just transform communities and systems. We, us, as people, are going to be made new in the process. Discover something about ourselves that we might not have known before that moment. And most importantly, if we do this, it's going to change how connected we are and can be to one another. This work of disruption is a prayer. It's an intention, a critical path forward, and a deep analysis about where we've been and where we need to go. It is also a recognition that in this present day context, with the world as it is right now, disruption is devotion. Devotion to spirit, to faith, to connection. Disruption is care. Deep and intentional care for self and community. Disruption is mindfulness. Mindfulness of everything that makes each of us whole and fully present and alive. Disruption is solidarity and comradeship. When we are in relationship long enough that I might already know what you need because I've already been there with you. It begins with me, with you, with all of us. The only way to liberation for all people is to embody a transformational Unitarian Universalism. That is, to be willing to interrupt the usual course of things and be open to the changes that building a new way. Did y'all hear that song? Y'all sang it really nice too. That was nice. We have to be willing to disrupt and interrupt the usual course of things and be open to the changes that building a new way may bring to your heart, body, mind, and spirit. What sacred moment will be unearthed by you? I'm not just talking to some of you, I'm wondering about everybody. What will you uproot or call into question? What dreams will you carve out of the clay? Muscle into something solid, something true. These are the questions to consider and respond to if a mature faith is what we strive for. May it be so. Amen. Ashe. And blessed be.